ugly green rustic.
Big lamp.
This is a very nice,
Oh.
very nice Ford.
You like driving it?
Everybody ready?
Good morning. As will ever be.
Bell is rung. Don't ask for human tolls. Welcome to New Madison, First Universalist. This nice, breezy, not too hot summer morning. It's definitely August, but it's a little bit better than it has been in the past.
Not too hot yet.
Not too hot yet. Of course, the day's not over yet either. So, today was the ice cream at the park
Yep.
at New Madison.
No, Greenville.
Oh, in Greenville.
Greenville concert.
Oh, the concert in the park. Okay.
Concert park, yeah.
That'll be our first announcement. Concert at the park at Greenville. Someone's providing ice cream. So, you know what time?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
Yep.
Should be a little bit cooler and bring them.
Last about an hour, yeah. No, it lasts an hour.
It lasts an hour.
It lasts an hour.
Exactly. Bring your mosquito dope. I think Greenville sprays for mosquitoes, but at 7 o'clock at night, you're like lunch on a smorgasbord for mosquitoes, so bring your dope. We have any other announcements? I think, are we having church board the 15th?
Yet to be determined.
Oh, wait, we're still working on that.
We'll announce it. It'll probably be more toward the end of the last Sunday, probably, but we'll announce it next week.
Okay, we're working on, and that, we're gonna have church board and our annual meeting pretty much concurrently or consecutively or however that works, so. And I think we still have the thing where you can phone in and listen if you don't wanna come and attend. We're happy to have, Pastor Derek Parker with us again from El Dorado on loan once a month at least, maybe twice a month. And the service this week, or the lesson this week, is the parable of the weeds. Good and evil intertwined, how to weed your garden. So, what are our slides going to be? Weeds.
I love weeds.
And from my farm background, there's probably as much wheat as there is weeds. So, we get a little bit of that too. And
My favorite.
the first weed that everybody calls a weed, dandelions. But if you like dandelion wine, dandelions and dandelion greens. So weeds, the actual definition is something growing where you don't want it. So that doesn't necessarily mean exactly what a weed is. So a dandelion, if it's in your yard and your neighbors don't like it, it's a weed. If it's in your yard and you're making dandelion wine, then it's a plant that you've nourished and want to make use of. Any announcements? Okay. Prelude is let all mortal flesh keep silent. Very nice. Let all mortal flesh keep silent. Perfect for the beginning of church. I missed the welcome, and we've already got one picked, so if you go to your hymnal in 435, we'll do our welcome. We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment, until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking the time to look into one another's faces and see their communion, the reflection of our own eyes. A house of laughter and silence, memory and hope is hallowed by our presence together. Kathleen McKee. Very nice. All right, our chalice lighting. We're going to do our meditation moment with our chalice lighting. We have Dee Dee found our original, which I couldn't find, but it was hidden underneath there. So we're going to do our church bell, and we'll do this one, and we'll either alternate, or if people have a preference and want to let me know, we can do one or the other, or we can do one more than the other. I actually like them both. I like the church bell, and I like the history of the church bell, having been played here before, and it has a nice tone. But as far as meditation goes, that actually fits better. Kenny, can you ring the church bell, please? They both have a nice tone, so it depends on how loudly you want to proclaim your meditating spirit. If you want soft and gentle and whispered around the edge, we'll use this one. If you want to proclaim it with your banners flying, we'll use that one. Okay, our chalice lighting is 450. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in the kindling flame. And that's by Hannah Sinesh. Our slide is I doubt anybody actually knows what this is, do they? Purple loose strife?
Oh,
In Michigan, that's a real plague.
It's not only in Michigan it's a plague. Let me advance and then I'll come back. People think how beautiful the scenery is out west, and you'll see it on roadsides. I've seen multiple pictures, and how beautiful it is with the purple flowers. Purple loosestrife is an invasive species that crowds out Native American plants. And the problem is that the animals, the insects, the flora and fauna, the little bugs, everything that depends on and has grown up and evolved with our Native American plants, these plants are being crowded out by purple loosestrife, which nothing else has adapted because it's an Asian invader. So I guess the lesson or something to think about during our time of meditation is sometimes things that are beautiful in an aspect or appearance are not necessarily beautiful in performance or in existence. So our opening hymn is 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. And this is one of those typical pictures, the beautiful landscape with the flowers that add to the beauty, but not necessarily to the positive experience for everything who lives in the environment. Our affirmation is 461. We must be saved. Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime.
Therefore we are saved by hope.
Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history.
Therefore we are saved by faith.
Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone.
Therefore we are saved by love.
No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or our foe as from our own.
Therefore we are saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness.
Reinhold Niebuhr, a famous German philosopher, and a good point to remember. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friends or our foe as from our own. Okay, our children's story. Faith is a walking stick. And you've probably seen me. I have my walking stick, and I'll give you the history. This is a walking stick that I cut out of a brush pile from a tree we cut down. I have 4 or 5 of these because I lose them all the time. I walk up to the garage, I pick up 2 5-gallon buckets of paint, I carry them back, I put them in the truck, and the walking stick is still at the garage, and I get in the truck and I drive off. So I have to keep replenishing them with free walking sticks. That's why I don't ride canes. All right, Faith is Like a Walking Stick. This is by Gary Kozlowski. He's one of my favorite authors. This is found in the UCC, or the UU, keep going back to UCC, found in the UU's source guide online. They give us all the information. Most of the stuff that I present here comes out of their free information that they give us. They have sermons, they have children's stories, they have chalice lightings, they have offering statements, they have pretty much everything we need for a complete service. How many of you like to go hiking? I have a number of walks nearby that I like: Hunger Mountain, Snake Mountain, and others. Or if we don't want to drive, my wife and I just go down to the local park, where in just a few steps you can forget you're in the city. Sometimes we bring our dog Smokey along, and Smokey isn't as strong or as fast or as he used to be. But that's okay, because I'm not as young or as fast as I used to be either. And Smokey reminds me to slow down. A walk in the woods isn't a race, after all. It's not about seeing how fast you can go or how quickly you can get to the end of the trail. A walk can be like a meditation, a series of moments to be aware of all the sights and sounds along the way. If you're in too big a hurry, you forget to hear the birds, to hear that they might not see the little mushrooms growing under the trees and the little mushrooms with the yellow caps. But even when you take your time, a walk can sometimes be tough going. What if it starts to rain? And what if there's a wet, soggy, boggy place where the stepping stones are few and far between? Well, in those cases, I found a couple of things that help. First of all, it helps to have a friend or two along, because then, even if it starts to pour and the raindrops are trickling down your nose, you can always sing a song together. It's hard to feel sorry for yourself when you're singing an old Beatles song. And for those soggy, boggy places, if you can't have a friend along, there's nothing like a walking stick, which helps you keep your balance. Whether you're walking uphill or down, it makes you a little steadier on your legs. Walking sticks make me think about our faith, Unitarian Universalism, which is a little different from other religions. Because for us, life is like a long walk or a journey. It starts when we're little children, just learning about our world, and then grows as we grow. With each step, we're always gathering more information and gaining more experience, finding out about ourselves as we explore our beliefs change. The things we imagine might be true when we are 6 years old are different from the dreams we have when we're 60. And none of us is just as certain where or how the trail ends, or what we'll find when we finally reach the mountaintop. But we know that other people have walked this way before, and that gives us hope and courage to continue on the adventure. Now, just like on a long trail, life sometimes gets a little tough and even can be scary. And that's why it helps to have friends and a spiritual community like this one. And at times we start to lose our balance and we begin to fall down. Then it's handy to have a walking stick. Unitarian Universalism, our religion, is like a walking stick. It's not a religion that solves all our problems. It's not a religion that can magically lift us over the muddy places. It's not a religion that spares us the necessity to dig deep and struggle when there's a big boulder we have to climb over or other challenges that come along. But it is a religion that can help us keep our equilibrium, that helps us keep our feet on the ground, which reminds us when the going gets hard that each of us is strong, each of us is resilient, each of us is capable, however we identify our gender, our ethnicity, our race, whether we're big or little. A Unitarian Universalism is a faith that encourages each one of us to find and make our own beliefs. Not a one-size-fits-all religion, but one we constantly tool and retool as we go along. So this is my personal walking stick. His has his initials on it. I don't take time to do that because I usually don't have them long enough. Maybe I should put my address on it like a dog tag, somebody can return it. But each of you will have the opportunity to make your own stick, just the right size and weight, the right thickness, so you can have a firm grip to help you go where you need to go. And as Unitarian Universalists, you too can find and make a religion you can call your own. All right, sharing of joys and concerns. Yes.
I talked about my friend Carl. He was in the nursing home last time I was here. And right now he's in hospice. He's not
Okay.
very possible practice.
Is he accepting hospice? Does he have someone to talk to?
I got to go down there this week. But I was told by his wife that they take it pretty quick. So.
Okay. Carl, whose friend is in hospice, hospice has a chaplain. I hope people will avail themselves of those chaplains. They're usually pretty sharp people. They usually know what's going on. They've had a lot of experience with that transition to the mountaintop, as we might say. And it's a scary time, not only for the patient, but also for the family. Anything else?
This week I heard from Marty Thompson. We remember Marty as being an active member of our church for many years, or several years, as well as a worship coordinator. Marty had had some hip surgery and was timing that as in between terms of her working on her Master in Divinity program, and had some complications with her hip surgery. So it's all remember her in our thoughts and prayers. She seems to be getting along a little better now. She said she's getting ready mentally and physically to begin a new term at the seminary there in Central Ohio, where she is participating or a member. And also, I wanted to share a joy this week that many others may have shared as well. And that is, there's a sacred concept, practice, if you will, in our democracy called compromise. I think we should all stand up and celebrate, but I'll remain seated. Looking at the infrastructure bill, which will benefit all of us in this country, and having both Republicans and Democrats come together, not in total agreement, but in agreement in principle that this is good for the country and that we move forward, compromise. Let us celebrate.
And let us remember the hen house. Don't count your eggs before they're hatched. The Senate is working on the compromise now, but it is not through yet. So, and this is a very volatile combination of egos at the Senate right now. So,
And that is, don't count your chickens. You will have your eggs more than likely. And don't count your chickens before they hatch. It's my understanding that Marty and her husband, Mike Benino, still live in Pickla. But she did not mention that in her email to me. But I sent her regards, my regards, as well as our congregations back with her. So it was good to hear from her.
yes, and I would take it as a favor for people not to mention complications of hip surgery in the future, at least for another month.
So my concern is, why am I not more sensitive to the needs of our current congregation?
Yes.
So I want to
Well, I don't have a date yet, so hopefully I'll forget that by the time the date comes up. But just keep that in mind.
We'll talk.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to keep in your hearts a friend of mine I've known for over 20 years. I'm not going to share his name because there's a need for some anonymity on this, but early this week he learned that his 20-year-old son is addicted to heroin. And this is going to be a very long, painful journey for the family going forward. There have been strange behaviors this past year that have been concerning, and it came out because he failed a drug test at work and lost his job, and then had to tell mom and dad why. And heroin is a very difficult addiction to complete recovery from.
And there's a long road, a long path. Some people seem to function fairly well with heroin addiction, and then they spiral into a disastrous set of circumstances that they can't recover from. So.
Well, as well as the overdose concern, because the county that these friends of mine live in most of the heroin is laced with fentanyl, which can be lethal.
Yes.
Is,
Yeah.
And that is, and actually the shots that you can get, the inhalant is almost freely available almost anywhere, but you need to be with someone to administer it. If you're in your bedroom alone and administer your own heroin and can't breathe anymore, if there's nobody there to give you the
Narcan.
then it's not going to work. So. All right. We need to remember our United States, our Western United States, the fires are multiplying, they're getting hotter, they're getting longer. If you've seen the pictures of the reservoirs down to levels, basically they haven't been seen since they formed the reservoirs and they were filling. Pretty unbelievable. And no relief in sight so far. So now decisions are being made who gets the water. Is it the farmers who irrigate for their livelihood, or is it the fish that keep that will expire, that will go on the endangered species list and go extinct without the water to keep them going? The population of salmon, the flathead suckers, all of these fish have plummeted in the last few years because of the lower water supplies. So, and I don't know what the answer is there. Maybe put water in your lawns. Some big decisions, some big changes are going to have to be made as time goes along here. Anything else?
Yeah, Tim, today, I'd like to remember my uncle, John Stepper, passed away Wednesday. He was 89 years old.
Wow.
In Lake Forest, North Carolina. And he would have been my dad's youngest brother, so he was my last uncle. That generation is old.
That generation is disappearing. The World War II veterans, that generation is disappearing. Any others? All right, thoughts and prayers for Carl as he makes his transition, for Marty as she heals. As we go along, for Lloyd's uncle, and for Derek's friend and family, not only the person involved, but also the family trying to support him. That may be the most painful thing, is not being able to do anything about a family member's problem. All right. And it's time for our message.
Perfect. I didn't even suggest that.
Well, I'm trying to go back. There it is. All right. Tares identical to wheat. I'm assuming you're going to talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, and I forgot to light the candles. I'll do that when I come back.
Good morning again.
Morning.
I want to say thank you to the congregation in El Dorado for releasing me to be up here today. I'll be back again in 2 weeks, which is a little unusual, but it's a month with 5 Sundays, so I get to be here twice. And for those who may be watching at home, remember that we do love and care about you, and that if you're feeling isolated, you do have friends out here in the world. To introduce my message this morning, I have a parable that comes out of the Gospel of Matthew. Another parable Jesus put forth to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good wheat in his field. But while the people slept, his enemy came along and sowed tares among the wheat and then went away. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came to him and said, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then do we have tares?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' The servants said to him, 'Do you want us to go and pull them out?' But he said, 'No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will say to the reapers, first gather the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into the barn.' While leading a recent discussion group at my other work, my non-El Dorado church work, where I'm an activities coordinator at a retirement community, our group somehow got onto the topic of weeding gardens. When, someone wondered, is really the best time to weed out thistle. Because the problem is if you pull thistle up when it's too small, the roots tend to fragment, and you end up with chunks of it still underground. And so you just generate more of the weed. But if you go too long, the thistle goes to seed, and it spreads new seedlings all over the place. A wise gardener in the group reflected that to get rid of thistle long term, you need to grow it large enough that you can grasp it firmly from the base, pulling it up so that you will pull up most of the roots. Most of the roots. But you'll also need to pull it up before it goes to bloom and can produce seeds. Letting it grow to a moderate amount of time doesn't really feel like an attractive choice if you're a gardener, but it may be the most effective one. Today's message is not so much about weeding. Today we contemplate a principle of spirituality symbolized in the act of pulling weeds. Today we investigate discernment. Eternal One, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who has the wisdom to do this? These are words of wisdom. They are words of prayer. They are part of an old Jewish prayer that gets labeled the prayer of King Solomon, although the rabbis are pretty sure that Solomon did not write it, but it sounds wise, so we stick the king's name upon it. This is a prayer that I would recommend to every person who would exercise even the smallest degree of authority at work, at school, in your home, in this church, or even while shopping. The prayer includes the phrase, that I may discern. The rabbinical commentators note that in Hebrew, the phrase translated into English as that I may discern means that I may separate, sift, or pull apart. That I may separate, sift, or pull apart. This phrasing about discernment is a reminder that the moral ground we stand on is often overgrown and entangled. And hasty weeding may not be the wisest action to take. So it's fascinating to me that this idea echoes between the Jewish faith to a discussion group that got off the track on weeding your garden, to the teachings of Jesus. In the parable of the weeds, which also gets labeled the parable of the tares, T-A-R-E-S, Jesus teaches using the conundrum of pulling up a common Middle Eastern weed that ranges across Israel, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. The weed has a common name, tares. The scientific name is Lolium temulentum. And tares are a pretty-looking green grass, which eventually produces heads of wheat, heads of seeds that resemble wheat. But the seeds of tares are bitter and mildly poisonous to humans. And in the case of this weed, pulling it up requires that you also pull out the huge network of roots. So you're also going to be forced to pull up just about everything else growing around that pretty-looking stalk So you're ruining the good while pulling out the bad. And so Jesus warns his students not to immediately pull the weeds out of the wheat. As worrisome as it is to have a poisonous plant growing amid the wheat that you turn into your daily bread, the parable asks us to wait until the wheat and the tares are grown. Then the parable tells us to pull apart the weeds and the wheat and sort through the two. And one of the ways traditionally this would get sorted is that tares, when it gets to like the age where it dries out, turns a very bright yellow compared to the wheat. They're very hard to tell apart, but an experienced farmer would know. Well, then the weeds, the tares, can be cut off and burned, and the wheat you can cut off separately and take to the barn. In the prayer attributed to King Solomon and in Jesus' parable, right thinking and right action require patience and dedicated thinking, contemplation, discernment. We need time and deliberate attention to pull apart the contentious arguments that always surround us, as well as the arguments that go on inside us, sorting through what is true and reliable from what is empty speculation, sorting between what is deception, including self-deception, as well as hearsay, from what we can verify as true. Discernment is not only the sorting of the good and the wise, but it's also understanding what is timely and what needs to be tolerated so we can avoid hasty mistakes and the destruction it causes. So what if, in our culture, the prayer of King Solomon was not so obscure, but something that a lot of people pray daily? Or what if we lived in a culture that valued thoughtful, deliberate patience and practiced every day, face to face with all of our needs, our hopes, and our fears? Is this a time to say yes to the other argument and lay my own agenda aside? Is this a time maybe to reframe my purpose? Or is this a time to say no so that I can say a deeper yes to something that is important? Is this maybe instead a time to pause, trusting the process of reasoning still at work, that this may be an instrument of the Spirit? What claims on my time and attention and resources deserve to be honored in this situation? And what might the inner voice be calling us to do in these weedy moments? I think that discernment usually involves a willingness to intentionally contemplate. If our ethics are just set on automatic pilot, our decisions can become reflexive, knee-jerk, more rigid than grounded in relationship. Yet I will freely admit there are some things that are absolutely right and other things that are absolutely wrong. There are some things that are true, and there are some things that are just completely false. However, the older I become, the more I see that those absolutes stand at the outer edges of a big spectrum that is incredibly gray, and that most of us spend our lives walking around in. This gray area is where ambiguity, competing goods, and our unpredicted outcomes complicate our understanding of the world that life gives us. Now, most of us will know the easy examples of sorting from a freshman ethics class, like, is it okay to steal food to feed a starving child? Or is it okay to lie to the authorities in order to protect somebody from unjust arrest? But there are many more difficult questions. For example, I think a difficult question for our culture right now is, where does my individual autonomy begin and where does it end? What do I owe others in terms of responsibility to the wider human family? Maybe there's a part of my own autonomy I need to sacrifice in this instance for the sake of others. Our own questions in daily life might be more subtle, not as stark as these. But the ethical questions present themselves to us each and every day. They are what life gives us for our practice of listening and thinking and growing in wisdom. I'm going to note that King Solomon, our mythical King Solomon, who authored, probably not, this prayer, did not pray for a legal code. He already had that in the scrolls from the book of Leviticus. What was contained in this prayer was a prayer for discernment, for an understanding mind, for a good eye, an intelligent ear, and, in his language, the grace of God's inspiration. Because like wheat and tares, good and bad can look pretty similar. Our culture's current tendency to demonize those other people we disagree with, the tendency to stereotype those who we disagree with, to polarize arguments, policies, politics, into overly simplistic right and wrong sides, the tendency to ignore the multiple partial merits of arguing factions. This comes not from sacred wisdom, but from human fear. True discernment is tough work. It is strenuous to consider context, mitigating circumstances, the stories, the real-life stories of those involved in messy situations, and even our own vested interests, which might be selfish. It is too easy to just cite a law, apply the legislative fine, and then leave to go play golf, and never think about it really again. Some things are evil, some things are good, some things are false, some things are true, and sometimes it is clear to most people which one is which. But a lot of the times, it's not that simple. It's not so simple to just yank out the weeds without spreading them. It is not so simple to pull out the weeds without uprooting all the good things growing nearby. We need to use thoughtful care. We need the urging of the inner spirit. We need the thought-provoking stories of the great world religions. We need the practice of wisdom in the very midst of things. Because this will empower us to choose the better way, the long-term better way, and to keep making choices despite everything that remains unresolved. Thank you for finding that. That was a wonderful visual aid.
The advantage of optical and slides. Is there any guideline? If you said there was, I must have missed it.
Guideline for what?
For making each decision individual decision, or is it situation ethics? Is every ethical decision based on the situation?
It feels like I'm a college philosophy class or an ethics class. Because people will argue like, oh gosh, like you have to have an absolute outside reference to compare everything to. And there will be other people who will say, you know, it's all situational. I'm kind of leery of arguments that are all and everything and always. I wish I had a formula for when to go to the outside reference, whatever that may be. Maybe your sense of a higher power, a humanistic ethical ideal. I wish I did. But then maybe I wouldn't have to be so discerning if I had to pause and think. Sometimes I wonder if when the situation turns out to be deeply muddled, if an outside reference could be very useful to me. And there are other times, I just have this history of things, when people say, the rule says X and it's always X, therefore Y. That maybe it's time to look at the situation in the context. But are these a good hard, fast rule? No, because being human is messy. It's messy, hard work to do it well. And I would say our culture right now is in a phase where we're not doing it terribly well. I think a lot of the prevailing culture around us wants hard and fast rules, except when it gets in the way of something they really want. And there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction going on. The kind that's easy when we're just a little bit alienated from each other. When we don't want to hear about the other person's context. Last night, little side story, last night my husband and I watched the Netflix documentary Pray Away, which looks at the ex-gay movement in the U.S., particularly a nonprofit called Exodus that used to counsel gay and lesbian people to become straight. Exodus as an entity no longer exists, although there are other things that have risen to try and take its place. But Exodus was a huge organization well until like 2010 or shortly after that. What changed, though, their story about why they are the person they are and the life experiences they have. Dee Dee wants to say something.
I want to ask.
Ask.
I thought you would, instead of using the word discernment, I thought you were going to talk about judgmentalism. What's the difference between being discerning and making judgments?
So, we all make judgments. We make them all the time. In fact, if you have any values, you've made some judgments. There's no getting around that. Judgmentalism, I would say, is an issue of degree. And it's the issue of when the judgments become harsh, when they become deaf to other people, when you put out the judgment and you hear, ouch, and you go, I don't care. I think judgmentalism goes hand in hand with what I would call dogmatism, where people are trafficking in very hard absolute rights and wrongs, and often there are fewer of those than we think there are. And even those, there are places where things get gray around the edges, including things like, well, thou shalt not steal. But is it okay to steal a loaf of bread to save a starving child? Some people say yes. I might do it if I didn't have the resources to feed that child. So judgmental discernment, I think this is a little harder for Unitarian Universalists because we don't come from a tradition that has a wide bench of contemplative practice. You can find contemplative practice in some of the Catholic and Anglican communities that are rooted in like Franciscan practice or Benedictine practice or even Dominican practice, where there's an attempt from time to time to step away from all the doing and the world and to think deeply about what is going on. Quakers do a version as well, which is why Quakers often take refuge in silence and try to stop and listen for what is the really deep, deep truth at work in that moment. And to try and do it collectively as well. That's one thing that all these communities have in common. You test these leadings in your very trusted faith community because you might get it wrong, or you might have gotten it right, or you might have gotten it half right. And you need your friends around you to challenge you, to say, ooh, that rings true, but not that part. Or, oh, you've got this half of it. But what if we put that with this other half I have? Do we get something that rings even more true than before? So yeah, but judgmentalism is something we have to be on guard about. And I can say that I can be guilty of that with people I disagree with. Say, for example, people who will not get vaccinated. I have known people on a broad spectrum. Some of them it's just knee-jerk, you can't tell me what to do. Some of it's just being in denial. But I also recently met somebody who had a really awful experience in her background. How many of you remember the fen-phen drug scandal about the time, sometime between 2000 and 2005. I was in seminary when it happened. Fen-phen was a drug cocktail given to people for chronic pain, particularly back pain. And my mother was on it briefly before it got yanked back off the market. The problem is, even though it was FDA approved, if you're on it long term, they discovered it causes heart valve failure. And a lot of people who were on this for a couple of years or more suffered heart valve damage. And what happened after that? Well, because no one really takes care of you when that happens, the whole thing got thrown into court and did not get settled for years and years and years. And sometimes after some of these people died and needed the financial support of the court settlement. I met a person recently who keenly remembers an aunt of hers dying of heart damage caused by fen-phen, which was FDA approved. And her aunt had been on it for a couple of years. My mom said it was great in back pain relief. It was wonderful. It was the best stuff she was on. And she's glad she wasn't only on it for a couple months. But people have these reasons lingering around. Or in the African American community, where some people have the lingering memories of the Tuskegee experiments and go, can we really trust what we're being told? Take this drug long term. I encouraged her to consider that as far as I know, most vaccine complications are very, very, very rare. And I left it at that, without just saying you're a terrible person and you're endangering everyone around you, which was tempting to say.
It's hard. It's hard to keep your mouth shut.
Well, and to be discerning.
That's where the
Careful
discerning comes in.
About the communication. And really to think, I mean, what would be the communication that might nudge this person to change their thinking if you're in a disagreement?
Money.
Money?
Offer them $100 if they get a shot.
I'm not sure in her case, with her level of fear, that would have been the case. But some people will do things for money. I don't know that, how do I put this? So one of the early Universalists, John Murray, somebody threw a rock at him while he was preaching. And he picked up the rock and he showed it to people. He said, this argument is kind of weighty and persuasive, but ultimately it's not very convincing. Money can be the same way. People will say they agree and take the money, but are they really convinced? No. Do you get compliance? Maybe. Hopefully.
We'll get that shot in their arm. That'd do a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes the answer is not confrontation, it's consequences. You have the right not to get the shot, but then shopkeepers, churches, schools have the right to tell you you cannot enter unless you're wearing a mask or have the vaccination. All these people that say they're definitely not going to get the vaccination are going to have to try to get into Canada, England, any other country in the world is not going to let them enter without their little vaccination handbook. So
Yeah, there are natural consequences for everything we do. My husband is a social worker. He deals with this all the time. He will sometimes have clients who say, I am not going to bathe. Well, the natural consequence to that is your employer is going to send you home and you will not earn a paycheck because you're not willing to bathe. All his clients are in some sense mentally disabled. You are free to not bathe, but your employer is going to send you home. Natural consequence. And usually they decide, I'm tired of being home all the time. And I'm tired of not having any money to do anything fun with. So eventually, they take the hygiene advice. But yeah, natural consequences. Are we at the end of this progression?
looks like it.
Possibly so.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. I will see you again in 2 weeks.
And we enjoyed it. Let me make an announcement. Somebody called my phone while we were going on here, and for some reason it shut off the stream. So if that happens when I'm up here, let me know, and I'll come down and back out of that, whatever that stupid program is that when the phone, usually it never did that before. When the phone would ring, I have it on silent, and it just doesn't do anything. Now it's popping up some weird screen. So once again, technology comes out when we try it. I forgot during Joys and Concerns, a concern that I just learned about today. In New Madison, there's a child who has a reoccurrence of a tumor. That's going to be a pretty serious thing. It's happened before, and the family is worried about it and dealing with it. So a bunch of thoughts and prayers for that family as well, and that child. And we'll light a few candles for the other ones that I forgot. And as Derek mentioned, if you're watching and have joys and concerns, please feel free to let us know one way or another, and we will include you. This is the actual plant. It's called Darnell, is the actual name of it. And you can see it does look tremendously amount like wheat. So, okay, offering. Our offering message is from Victoria Weinstein. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather there to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support this self-supporting church and its many ministries. And if you're watching, you can drop off, or you can go to the website and put money in there. thank you, Lloyd, for Blue Room, which was the tune that he was playing before. That's just, that's a happy tune.
I love it.
And thank God for OCD, or as those who suffer and straighten our signs call it, CDO. Closing hymn is 42, Morning So Fair to See. Everybody knows what these are, wheat sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. They don't have sheaves anymore unless you're Amish, and even the Amish are going to, kind of confusing. They have horse-drawn combines, but they have a diesel engine that runs a combine, runs on wheels like a regular combine, but they're pulled by horses. The same way with hay balers. They have a diesel engine runs a hay baler, and 4 horses or 6 horses will pull it through the field. So the reason I bring this up is the old-fashioned threshing, and it's kind of hard to see on this picture, but you see the guy standing on the big mound of straw. I'm of that age where I managed to make that transition, which the transition never stops, it goes on and on. And sometimes you wonder, you know, I should have taken pictures of things which I thought were commonplace and ordinary, which have disappeared. My dad was a vet. We used to go to Amish farms, and in the barnyard of every Amish farm was a huge stack of straw like this, because they threshed their wheat, they blew the straw into a big pile, and then around it would be a group of cattle and Belgian draft horses, blonde-looking Belgian draft horses, and they would eat their way in as the winter came along. So it began to look like a giant mushroom with a stalk in the center and a big cap coming out over the top. So the horses and the cattle would shelter underneath that cap. And I thought that was just the neatest thing when I was a kid. But I can't find a picture of it anywhere, and I've never seen it. I haven't seen it since. Of course, I haven't visited many Amish farms since. I guess we'll take a trip up to Holmes County in the next few months and see what I can find. But
Tim,
yes.
is the sheaves, is that the pile?
Sheaves are the individual, when they would cut it with a scythe, and the scythe, if you have ever seen any of the old movies, a scythe with a cradle, the scythe would go along, the wheat would fall onto the cradle and be in a bundle. Then they would take a piece of actual wheat, because the stalks are flexible, and they would tie that sheaf with a stalk of wheat, and then they would sit it on the ground, and then everything gather all the other sheaves, and then they would put a cap on it, so if it rained, the water wouldn't soak down into it, it would run across it. They would make a cap like you would do, like they used to do the roofs, or they still do the roofs in England, where they use the grass and they weave it into the roof line.
But his question is, that's not
That's not the sheath. This is the sheath.
That's
The
just,
sheath
that,
is the
that's,
file?
that's
Is it
what's
the file?
left.
No, these pictures are made up of individual sheaves.
But the big thing
The big thing is just a straw pile.
is straw, it's straw.
So the sheath is the individual little bundle that's tied.
Yes.
That's the sheath.
That's the sheath.
You
And
can
you
see-
can see on
the
this
tie
picture
in it.
here, there's an individual bundle and a bundle and a bundle, and they all lean them together. And then when they get done, this one, they haven't done it yet, but they'll put a couple bundles crosswise on the top to shed the rain. And then they'll come along with a wagon, pick them up, take them back to, and this was, we all heard about the threshing parties when the steam thresher would go from farm to farm to farm because they'd gathered up all their sheaves and they'd dried the wheat. And then the steam thresher would power the threshing machine, which had a big tube that blew the straw clear up to the top of the pile. Yes.
The little church I grew up in, one of our hymns was bringing in the sheaves,
Yes.
bringing in the sheaves.
Oh, yeah.
We shall be rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves.
And everybody knows bringing in the sheaves, but you know, as people get younger and don't see things and don't watch the old movies on TV, they don't know what a sheaf is anymore. It's not a sheep, it's a sheaf.
I'm 75 and I didn't know what a sheath was until 5 minutes ago.
Sadly, many people are city boys, and city boys didn't know what sheaves were either, unless in the old days, even when I was farming, when I started farming, we used to be able to hire city boys on the football team to come out and bale hay for us. Pretty soon, city boys said, I'd rather go to the air-conditioned gym and lift weights than get paid $1 an hour to throw 70-pound bales of hay around in 95-degree heat. So, and that's why when you drive down the road now, you'll see round bales the size of garages sitting out in the fields because nobody can hire anybody to handle small bales anymore. But there are still small bales. A lot of people will sell small bales of straw for $3 or $4 a bale. But that's how we never had a round baler. We baled it all by small bales and put it out in the hay mound because it's easy to handle, it's easy to move. So, a little bit of farming history, a little bit more every year. Closing words, 691. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit. Join in if you'd like. Who know that without darkness nothing comes to birth, as without light nothing flowers. That's by May Sarton. Our postlude. In the good old summertime, we used to bale hay and combine wheat. Our service, First Universalist, New Madison. Hope that was a benefit to you. As mentioned, if you have problems, needs, worries, concerns, please contact us. We are here to help. Lemonade, and there's ice in the ice bucket. Donuts, they're in the freezer from last week, so this is the last week they'll be on offer. I'll take them home and eat them all myself, if you don't. So please do me a favor and eat some donuts or take them home and eat a donut.
money sticking out of the hymnal. I'm assuming that's yours.
Oh, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, it's sticking out of the hymnal.
That's where I put it.
Okay.
I lost this and I couldn't figure what the heck did I do with the money from this last week.
Okay.
And I can't get over
It's like, why is there cash coming out of the hymnal?
what's his name? This document says a few years ago. He used to do all kinds of charities and all that.
What years was this?
This would be probably 70 to 80.
Well, before evidence is such there. I was there in the
He was so happy that he I take this like a